This is part of a network of organizations, many of which you can see here, that include the ACLU of Ohio, Americans for Prosperity of Ohio, Buckeye Institute, Bail Project. Sorry if I'm going to miss somebody, Ohio Conservatives for Bail Reform, et cetera. This is a very broad-based network of organizations that are supporting. And I will ask everybody to, if you're not talking, kind of mute your Zoom while we're going kind of through the process. And with that said, I want to introduce Brian Tringali and his team from the Terrence Group, who conducted the poll. And I'll let Brian kind of go through their background and their relationship in Ohio. Myself, a long time work with Brian and the Terrence Group. So with that, Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can just have at it, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end.
So for a little background, the firm's been around since '77. Even though my beard is white, I haven't been with the firm for that long. But in the '80s, I joined the firm. We Ohio, and we go back to the days of George Voinovich being governor, and really even before that, when you can remember when Governor DeWine, now Governor DeWine, was a congressman and first elected to office. We kind of go back to those days working in Ohio, and I've always kind of focused in on Ohio, at least since I joined the firm. And as a result, not only do DeWine, but we've done pretty much all the Republican governors of the past, with the exception of Taft, and do a fair amount of the delegation, do the work for Senator Portman, who is obviously retiring. So we've got a fair amount of work that we've done in Ohio, and followed issues a lot, including some corporate work as well. And we're a national firm and one of the two larger Republican firms. Yeah, that's probably all we need to know. That and the fact that I guess my positions are moderate enough that I was never invited to any of the White House Christmas parties from the last administration, which is probably an important point for the press to understand too, about where I am and where the firm is. So I want to go through the data, but I think it's really important to recognize a couple things first. One is that Ohio, like much of the rest of the nation, is going through a rethinking of where they are on a lot of issues. I mean, a lot of issues. It's not just this one, but this one in particular seems to be very acute. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons, of course, is the pandemic. The pandemic has had a huge impact on the electorate. And part of that impact is this idea of taking care of each other, but it's also what they've seen on television during the pandemic, including, not only skirmishes, but the death of one American in particular that was carried live on national television. And so I think we've got to realize that the world is changing. It's probably going to continue to rethink much of its public opinion on a lot of issues for the next several months. And we are capturing that, I think, early. I think this is just the beginning of voters in Ohio rethinking where they are when it comes to criminal justice issues. So this is just one of many aspects of the criminal justice system that I think Ohio is rethinking. But again, one of the reasons for this is, in Ohio in particular, the opiate epidemic. We have seen in past focus groups recently, just over the years, that more and more and more people have had real direct relationship with the criminal justice system because of opiate addiction. That is a unique thing to Ohio. It's also true of New Hampshire and some other states, but it's very acute here in Ohio. When we ask people how many people they know that, or if they know anyone who's been lost because of opiate addiction, almost everyone in these focus groups is raising their hands. And again, I think that's a unique experience, and it's put Ohioans in direct contact in many cases with their criminal justice system. So kind of as we go through this, I think that's what I want everybody to sort of begin with the premise of, is that the world is changing. It's changing in terms of public opinion. It's changing in terms of the criminal justice issue. And I've got a quote that we're using here, and I'll read it because I think it's important. It's in the release that went to you. In the past pandemic period, we cannot underestimate the level to which Americans are rethinking long-held attitudes about our criminal justice system. This is reshaping how we think about race, certainly, but also how we think about fairness and humanity. In other words, how we treat each other. Again, this is the beginning, I think, based on years of looking at data in Ohio, what I think is changing public opinion over time. And so let's go to the summary, if we can. Next page. There we go. All right, so we have two summary pages here. And I think the first point is probably pretty important. And we'll come back to these at the end and talk about them as we go through this. But in case we lose anybody, we want to hit this summary really quick. So 75% of Ohio voters believe that the state criminal justice system is in need of reform, particularly working women. So, if you are in politics today and you are of either party, the key group to try to motivate and move into your camp, if you will, are working women. They are the key to the electorate for many campaigns today, and they are the most likely to be focused on this issue. That 75% figure is really strong. So I jokingly have said in the past, and I'll say it here, I can't get 75% of the voters to agree the sky is blue on a given day. And yet in Ohio, we've got 75% who think Ohio's criminal justice system is in need of reform. This is a strong opinion. And again, it's working women who drive that opinion. So I think that's critically important. Next one, in Ohio, there's also a sense of immediacy. 60% think it's either extremely very important to do this reform as soon as possible. Again, that immediacy is what's interesting. In public opinion, there's two sides to the coin. There's opinion, 75% here, and there's intensity. And you've got 60% here who want this done.
Bring that up if you want to.
Okay. Whoever's got their mic open, if you could just put it on mute, that'd be great. 60% of voters favor reforming the process by which people are released or not released from jail while awaiting trial. That's really important. 60% want that reformed. We'll come back to this at the end, but it's bipartisan. It's interesting. Republicans and Democrats agree. The wishy-washy ones are the independents, who, based on the other results in the poll, are probably not paying as much attention. 2/3 of the voters favor reforming Ohio's bail system so that release decisions are based on individual circumstances and cases and not how much money somebody has. Again, 50% or more across all party affiliations. This is a big deal. When we get into the specifics about bail, and much of this poll is about the specifics about the bail system, we find 67% who agree with this, who want this to happen, okay? And just 13% said they were less likely to vote for a candidate who disagreed with them on the criminal justice issue, but 31% claimed they would be more likely to support the candidate. So it's just interesting. We don't get a lot of backlash here. And, we jokingly say that in Ohio, you can find a coalition to say no to almost anything, right? Any ballot initiative, anything. You can argue 38% would be against, but here we don't see that. Let's go to the next page and then we'll get started really digging into the data. The later in the poll, this is the most important message of the poll. And so we asked people to respond to this about whether or not it would make them more likely or less likely to support reform. And this was the top message getter, the one most likely to move public opinion. So not just that it had an overall positive response, but that it actually caused people to rethink their position on the issue if they weren't already with us on this belief about bail. So Ohio should be a place of reform and justice for all. We need to reform cash bail so we can ensure each and every Ohioan is treated fairly in the criminal justice system, regardless of skin color or ability to pay. So we see in the open end, there's some belief that this is already the case, right? We see in our open ends that people almost believe this is already part of the Ohio Constitution, which is fascinating. So again, we know that people are, particularly based on these open ends, when we talk about the current cash bail system, that they are particularly sensitive to fairness and equal treatment under the law. That those ideas about what our criminal justice should be, show up throughout the poll, but particularly in the open ends, when we sort of throw it open to people about what they think. So we believe that fairness and equal treatment is the underlying concern about the criminal justice system. And we know from past polls, not conducted by us, but well, in a few cases we've done questions about it, but we know from looking at specific polls of the past that this focus on this issue has increased. All right, so let's get into the nitty and the gritty if we can. And I'm only drinking tea for those of you who are wondering. Got to have the caffeine. All right, so here we see one of the items that we talked about. We asked people on a 10-point scale what the need was for reform, and really we categorized them as extremely or very, but they're giving us a 10-point scale. So 60% arguing that it's either extremely or very important that this get dealt with soon. 82% that it's of some importance, right? But we look for that intensity. And part of what we want to mention here is that it's the working women, again, working women driving the immediacy. So this intensity, this immediacy is being driven largely by working women in particular. And again, that's important for both parties going forward. This is an issue particularly close to the heart of working women. Okay, let's go. Next one. This is, if you will, kind of our first ballot. So we asked people really early in the poll, should Ohio reform how and why we hold people in jail while they await trial, including through the use of cash bail as part of the statewide effort to reform Ohio's criminal justice system? So we've given them no messages yet, okay? We haven't tried to move anybody in any directions here. This is an early look at where they are in terms of opinion. You can see intensity is a little low, but it's a strong majority at 58%. But still, we end up with almost a third of the vote that's undecided. And this is largely people who haven't thought about the issue. It's dominated by people who are independent voters, and some seniors fit into this category as well. But again, working women driving this and driving this strongly. Again, this is sort of our first ballot early in the poll. Let's keep going. All right, would you strongly favor, somewhat, or oppose efforts to reform the process by which people are released or not released from jail while awaiting trial? So kind of a similar look. Again, 60% favor, 22 strongly. This is, again, another indication, again, from focus groups that people have had real interaction with the criminal justice system. So again, you're down to 27% who are unsure. Again, driven largely by working women, particularly the central portion of the state, the Columbus area, more paying attention to government, but also those whose households have someone who works in the criminal justice system. So those who are involved, either in law enforcement, some aspect of criminal justice, are much more likely to be in favor of this and feel strongly about it. Okay. Also true of the minority communities. Okay. Would you strongly favor, somewhat oppose efforts to reform Ohio's bail system so that release decisions are based on individual circumstances and cases and not how much money someone has? So there's a little bit of a message in here, right? Things people don't know. And look at how much it moves, another 7 points, but the stronglies move up to a third. So when you've got half of the electorate that feels strongly about their position, that's a pretty solid place to be. That means they've at least had a chance to think about it. And so that's, again, a very strong result. Notice the unsures go down to 21%, and you're down to 13%. Again, in Ohio, we can get 30 some odd percent to disagree with almost anything. We're down to a very, very small group that is opposed. It's literally nobody. But again, we still see those independent voters, and again, a little bit the seniors who are more likely to be unsure. Okay, so going through here, yeah, let me just show you the regions in Northeast, Northwest. What matters to me is sort of at the bottom of the page, where you can see working women really driving this opinion at 74%. And go ahead and skip. Oh, yeah, go to the next page. Yeah, so look at these independents versus Democrats and Republicans. So you can see Republicans are at 61, Democrats jump up to 77, but even independents are at 56% support. Keep going. So again, looking at Republicans separately, and I'm doing this because this is something they asked us to do. I know that the group is going to want to share this with the legislature, and I believe in some cases they already have. Notice that both Republicans in both pretrial release process and in individual case reform, Republicans are solidly behind these ideas. Again, that's a revelation, and from what I can tell from the previous polling, that has not been true in the past. Okay, so here's the next one. So this is the slide, if you will, that I want you guys to, like, you know, if you're going to take away one slide from this, this is the one you probably want to look at. So this is literally a smorgasbord of all the things that we might ask in terms of programs or ideas, proposals. Oh, stay back. No, go backwards. There you go. All the ideas that we might want to throw at the legislature, that the legislature might consider. And really, there's only one of them where there's any significant pushback, right? So let's go through them, because I think they're really strong. And what's fascinating to me is how strong they are, that each of them ends up being so overwhelmingly supported. And again, this is the first time people are hearing these ideas, right? We've just asked them some basic questions, and now we're asking them this part of the poll. The number one, you can see it here, favor is in red, oppose is in blue, unsure is in yellow. To require a hearing on release options and conditions in front of a judge within 48 hours of detention. 77, again, I can't get people to agree the sky is blue at that level. And yet we're at 77 to 6. There's literally no pushback at all here on this question. And it's 40% strongly. So there's real intensity behind it. I mean, I would hazard to guess if we had done this in a focus group setting, people would have been shocked to find that that's not the case. That would be, again, new information for people, but they would probably be surprised that it's not already the case. The next one down the list, which is a pretty easy lift, to provide text reminders of court dates sent to people's phones for those accused of a crime, 71 to 10. That's an easy, the intensity's there at 43%. So you get real intensity, not just agreement, but real intensity behind these two. The next one, and we split the language here. So you'll notice in one of these questions here in the middle, the two middle responses, in half of the sample we asked path, and in the other half we asked value. So the first one is to create a release path for most people to go home on the same day as their arrest if they do not pose a flight risk and are not a threat to anyone else. 69 to 11. If we changed it to say release valve, 67 to 11, it's virtually the same, but we wanted to test the language to get a sense of that. And that's part of what the group was doing internally about how to communicate to the overall electorate about these issues. But we're going to see as we go through the poll that really it's only the independents and seniors that really need much information about it. So next, to stop the practice of keeping people in jail before trial because they cannot afford to pay cash bail. Clearly a fairness question. 52-22. Yes, we had some people end up in the middle, and they were more likely to be those independents and seniors again. But again, working women still strongly behind this. And then finally, the one that didn't do as well, the one where we got a little bit of pushback, a lot of pushback, to provide free public transportation to court for those accused of a crime. But we still were almost at 50%, which again is fascinating. So let's continue to go forward on this. So the next question is, would you be more likely or less likely to support a candidate for office if you agreed with the candidate on most issues and are of the same political party, but you disagreed with the candidate on criminal justice reform? You can see less likely, again, I mentioned this at the top, less likely is pretty low at 13%. And it's funny, we keep hitting sort of this 13% again and again and again. It literally is the coalition who kind of holds out on all these questions. But again, 31% more likely. Here's the interesting factor. Among independents, this was an even split, in part because they're unsure and no difference was so high. But among both Democrats and Republicans, the net more likely actually increases to 22%, right? So we get an 18-point difference overall, and it goes to 22% for both Republicans and Democrats. So the parties themselves have largely aligned together. It's these independent voters who are unsure or haven't really thought about the issue that end up in the middle. All right, so let's keep going. So we've got a couple of agree, disagree statements here, and this is good stuff. This is sort of the umbrella messaging, if you will, for potential use going forward. And you can see how strong some of this stuff is. Our basic thinking is that anything above 60% is likely to kind of pass the smell test with voters. It's a head nodder, if you will, for most people. In other words, if you're giving a speech and you drop this line in, the people in the back of the room are going to be nodding their heads. And here's the first one. And again, this is the message we tested. I read this at the beginning. This is the message we tested that was more likely than anything else in the poll to move people on this question. We already begin with them, but this question, when this message is put out to people, it either changes their opinion from undecided to with us, or to positive to against into the middle, or some gradation in between. I was somewhat supportive and now I'm strongly supportive. That was a possibility too. So again, most important message, Ohio should be a place of freedom and justice for all. We need to reform cash bail so that we can ensure each and every Ohioan is treated fairly in the criminal justice legal system, regardless of skin color or ability to pay. And this fairness question, specifically to cash bail though, right? Talking specifically about reforming cash bail, 70% to 9, 42% strongly, number one issue likely to move people. Next one on the list. So again, all of these you're going to see are above that 60% level. This was the strongest. Politicians unnecessarily hold thousands of Ohioans in jail, not because of what they've done, but because of money they do not have. Every minute someone spends behind bars unnecessarily is time away from supportive family, children, and loved ones. This ends up being a strong message, particularly to some evangelical voters, by the way. 62 to 15, very strong. Next one on the list. Black, white, or brown working people bear the burden of Ohio's unjust cash bail system. Every single dollar paid to secure a loved one's release could be better spent feeding a child, securing safe housing, or paying for school. So the alternate, what happens to the money question, which I guess is a real consideration for a lot of things, because criminal justice is obviously something that costs taxpayer a great deal. 61 to 12, 33 strongly. So in all of these questions, we get to at least a third strong opinion. Well, corporations in Ohio are taking in huge profits by locking up people for long periods because they cannot afford cash bail. True public safety means keeping all of us safe, not setting people up to fail. 62-13, again, a third strongly. Most Ohioans believe in treating each other fairly no matter our differences. Politicians have rigged the rules, demanding expensive cash bail for thousands stuck in jail, dividing Ohioans by race and place. We need a fair pretrial system, and it goes on. 64-13. All right, so how does that move people? So all of those messages, there weren't a lot, but there were some, move people where? To 70% support, right? So here's the thing that I think you need to understand and why I think we're holding a press event today. This debate in the public domain is a good thing for this issue. When Ohioans discuss this and hear some of the reasons about why we need to reform the cash bail system, they are likely to move positively on the issue. I think that is in many ways the big takeaway from this, other than the fact that public opinion has moved so much. And is that it will likely continue to move as this debate gets played out in the public domain. So articles that talk about these issues, likely to move people positively. And I think that for us is the big finding. The debate about this is good. The degree to which we can make this part of what people talk about in their backyards, now over their fences until we can be closer to each other, is all good. Yeah, go ahead and move forward. So we got 21% who actually switched to yes. So this is that multiple regression thing that I'm really into. And I'm going to bore you with some higher math here in a moment. But who moves on this? Yes, we move working women even more than we had before. And it's about solidification with them. But in terms of moving on the ballot, and this is my message to Republicans, and I've done work for some House members at the state level, but mostly I worked with the state Senate last cycle. This moves conservatives and it moves evangelicals. Both of those groups. Yes, working women were kind of already with us on this question, but we really see people of conservative values move and people with an evangelical background really move. And I think that is a big conclusion, at least internally, for those Republicans in the legislature. All right, let's talk now about okay, so I'm boring you now. I mentioned this before we got everybody on, but the higher math I'm really into. And all we're looking at here, and I don't want to make this more complicated than it is simply the idea of which of these messages is likely to correlate to movement on this question. So which of these messages is most likely to move people in terms of their public opinion, either incrementally or completely from one side to the other, but also incrementally. You know, you might go from somewhat to strongly here. Which of these messages is likely to move people? And it's the one I read at the beginning and here in the middle, treating everyone fairly regardless of skin color or ability to pay. But remember, that language has in bail reform. But you can see this is relative strength of values here of these different messages. And it is by far the strongest. And that's really the only conclusion we want you to understand. Time away from supportive families is important. We saw in the subgroups that was likely to move the evangelical voter and the conservative. So support, over 60% of people in jail have not been convicted. That had a little bit of an effect, and politicians rigging the rules need a fair pretrial system.
Oh, Brian, you froze up a little bit there. There we go.
Yeah, I've frozen up.
There you go. You're good.
So I am not showing movement on.
Yeah, Brian, you're good.
Okay. Which chart are you on, Mike?
Looking at the one you're just going over, the multiple regression equation.
Okay, can you go forward one? There you go. Sorry about that little glitch. I think it was in my own internet. Would you strongly favor somewhat? This is asking again that ballot question in the early going. We get to 70% here. Keep going. Here we go. Is this an important enough issue that you would be willing to contact your elected state rep and state senator? We have a lot of people who end up unsure. And so you see, this is real. Most people, a plurality say, admitted in the call that they're unsure whether or not they would, with another 22% saying yes. But look, 37% is a really high score because most people aren't going to be motivated. So will everybody be motivated to do that? No. But a portion of this yes group would be. And so we are showing enough intensity that people really are going to be in contact with their state senator or state rep. And so what's important to me here is the households who are involved in the criminal justice issue, right? So somebody's employed in some aspect of criminal justice. A majority of those households would be willing to contact their state rep or state senator. That's fascinating. So those involved in the issue, who know more about it, who are focused on it kind of every day, makes sense, but a majority of them feel strongly enough about the reform issue that they're willing to contact their state rep and state senator. I think that's a big finding. I think that's kind of super encouraging. And it might be sort of a leading indicator for us about how much people are willing to kind of get involved. What's interesting about this is that we end up with working women being in the group, but it was just as likely, if not a little more likely, to be working women who didn't go to college, who were more likely to contact their state senator and state rep. And again, I think this is a reflection of an electorate who's actually been dealing with this issue in their lives, who've had real face-to-face interaction because of a lot of issues, but of course, opiate addiction being one of the biggest ones. Real contact in their lives, real give and flow. So let's go to the summaries again. Just want to remind everybody, again, 75% want some reform in Ohio. That's specific to Ohio. 60% think we need to do it as quickly as possible. 60% reform the process by which people are released or not released while awaiting trial. Again, a majority among both parties. 2/3 reforming the bail system so that release decisions are based on individual circumstances and cases and not how much money somebody has. Again, 50% or more across all parties. Go to the next one. This is the final chart. Later in the poll, we asked, again, this message: Ohio should be a place of freedom and justice for all. We need to reform cash bail so that we can ensure each and every Ohioan is treated fairly in the criminal legal system, regardless of skin color or ability to pay. This is the one message that if it gets out there, if this is something that people think about, if this is discussed in the public domain, it's the one message most likely to move people to be supportive of reform. So debate about this question, great stuff. And again, the underlying factor here, sort of the underlying reason for this, is this sort of awakening of fairness and equal treatment when it comes to the criminal justice system. There's a belief that the reform is needed and that what is lacking, and this again, this shows up in the open ends, fairness and equal treatment. Open ends obviously being where we just sort of ask people why they feel that way. Again, I think this is super important. I think this is trending. I think this is only going to get stronger in the end. But if I had a chart that I would kind of hang up on my desk, it would just be all of the programs that people think, that people support. I mean, it's not just that they support the overall reform, it's they support all these specifics within it. I think that's super fascinating. So I've babbled on for at least a half hour. Good for me, if you know me.
Brian, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, you kept it relatively tight, so I appreciate that. I think, Lauren, if you can take the share screen off so I can kind of see everybody, and then we can open it up for questions from the press. So I think we'll open it up. If fire away. Any questions for Brian or his team?
I know we have other folks on here as well.
Yeah.
Who conducted the polling.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
This is Joe Ingalls. Did you look at breaking down the kinds of crimes that you were talking about at any point when you were talking to people? Because a lot of times we hear people say, yeah, we need criminal justice reform. And the minute something happens, we hear a cheer of lock them up. So is there any kind of detail that you can give us on that?
Well, the biggest one is the reaction to the need for bail reform, specifically for people who are not seen as being a threat or a flight risk. And so that was the language that we tested to try to sort of understand, what the difference is for the overall picture versus specifically for that group. But did we go into individual, felonies or anything like that? No, we did not. We did not. But good question.
Thank you, Joe. Any other questions? Andrew, WEWS, etc. All right. And I think Selena has provided, I think you all should have the press release, but there's also kind of the one pager in the chat.
I would ask both Selena and Claire, because they've driven a lot of both this and some of the earlier stuff, the getting the poll ready, and Jocelyn as well. Is there anything I haven't touched on that we talked about in the many discussions that we've had about how exciting this poll is and the outcome? What did I forget? Did I forget anything?
I think you did a great job, Brian. This is Claire Chevrier from the ACLU and Policy Council, and I focus on bail reform. I also think, Joe Ingles, thank you so much for your question. I think it's a very good one, especially because, a lot of what we were trying to get at here is our current system as it exists now too frequently allows people to go free based on resources, even if they are potentially a threat. And what we're trying to push for, and I know the Buckeye Institute, for example, has some really strong reports on this. What we're trying to do is have pretrial release decisions be based not on how deep someone's pockets are, but based on whether or not they actually pose a threat. And so that's a lot of what we're trying to get at with policy changes. And I think we were really blown away by how much Ohioans support those policies when you break it down. And it was important for us when we were developing this poll that we weren't just going to ask, do you support criminal justice reform? Sure, we asked that too up top. But then when we got into the details where we were describing, what are the policies that we actually think make good sense, it turns out Ohioans really agree with us.
Thank you. All right. Again, I referenced the press release that's out. You have quotes from not only Brian, but folks from the ACLU, from Micah Derry from Americans for Prosperity, Ohio, Twyla Carter from the Bail Project, Andrew Geisler from the Buckeye Institute, myself, Kevin Warner from OJPC, and Prentice Haney, and obviously Brian. So those are provided in the press release. I think obviously you could feel free to reach out to anybody who provided a quote if you want additional, but I think those are pretty good. With that said, any last chance for any questions from the media? All right, hearing none, thank you all very much. And
thank you for all your time. I
yes.
really appreciate the time and having so many people jump on. This is great. And I got to tell you, as a pollster, I get excited about this. I mean, this is big stuff, guys. The world is changing out there, and this issue changing is indicative of what's to come. We are entering into a time period when the world around us is changing. Really, people are rethinking fundamental positions. It's exciting.